Frank.
Why people meditate.
This is such a, yeah.
Well, you say yeah, but when you say yeah, then I end up saying, well, I already wrote the chapter. People should just read it. So you got to ask me something more specific. But I'll get it started, okay?
Okay.
Let me get it started.
Yeah.
First, I want to say I wrote this book a number of years ago now. It's been a while. And so one of the things that I think is useful about us having this conversation is that, I've done a lot of contemplating since, and that your questions will draw me out in directions that the book never took, or maybe draw out things that the book implied but didn't, go into a lot of depth. But I guess the place I would start with this chapter on why people meditate is to emphasize that 99.9% of the world is never going to meditate at all. Never going to meditate, or certainly never meditate in the way of the warrior's path of identifying fully with nowness. I think we have to face that it remains a very, very, something that inspires a relatively small percentage of the human race. I think we have to say that so that we don't become inflated about this grand scheme we have of bringing everyone into the practice of identifying with nowness.
But you talk about you talk about that here, right?
Well, I talk a lot about how the bottom line for human beings is that we want to be happy and we don't want to suffer. The Buddha recognized that, and it was the source of his love and compassion for all human beings, including very obnoxious ones, is that all of our motivation is ultimately that we want to be happy and we don't want to suffer. Now, for the vast, vast majority of human beings throughout history and up to the present time, the strategy for figuring out how to be truly happy and how to not suffer does not involve meditation. It does not involve not the meditation of completely identifying with nowness, but other forms of meditation that have been taught. It is a fairly, from the point of view of the human race as a whole, it is a fairly, for lack of a better word, elite or rarefied approach to the existential reality that all of us face. And you simply cannot get on a soapbox and tell people to understand things that they're not ready to understand. So the whole notion about why people meditate ends up being a discussion of the different levels of awareness of what our human condition is, and how seriously to take the conclusions that you come to and what you need to do about it. And for the vast majority of human beings, the fact that we're motivated by hope and fear, by the desire to be happy and by the fear of, and by the desire not to suffer, is something that we are just unconsciously pursuing all the time. And the Buddha called that the wheel of life. He called it samsara. He called it spinning. That we're all in this wheel of life of wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer, hoping for the best, fearing the worst, and doing whatever we can to make it work out for us. And what the Buddha said is, it ain't going to work out for us. It's not going to work out that way. Or as Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. Or rather, the unexamined life is going to lead you to making the same mistakes over and over and over again. So I think, the starting point here is to understand that even to embark on a spiritual path is to come to a certain level of awareness of the situation that takes you out of that unconscious pursuing the same things and hoping for a different result. Which, by the way, is what keeps materialism going. Just I'm going to keep doing it this way, but I'll hope for a different result.
Right. Whereas the mind of, you talk about this in this chapter, whereas the mind of meditation becomes interested in sort of creating an alternative to the mind that created the problem.
Exactly. That's what I said. How do we create an alternative to the mind that created the problem? Right. Good. And what's that famous saying these days? The definition of insanity,
Einstein,
right?
Or attributed to him, I don't know.
Is doing the same thing in the same way over and over and expecting a different result. So the Buddha would say that yes, for the vast majority of human beings in this world that we live in, there's that unconscious wishful thinking that we keep doing the same
Well,
thing.
Freud
with a different
attributed
result.
repetition compulsion
Sure,
to here.
sure.
I mean, just.
Absolutely.
But let me back up, because would you place sort of, you know, mindfulness has become a fad. And certainly, you know, you're a psychotherapist also. It's become clinically a fad. You know, it's the thing that's going to solve all your repetition compulsions, which it doesn't, right? That's not how it works clinically. You can offer that to folks, and it's helpful to some extent or another, but repeating things, samsara seems to be working, as you're pointing out, on an unconscious predicate.
It's fundamentally an unconscious level. Yeah.
And so, well, you know, the problem is deeper, but at the same time, I guess, is this desire then to be happy originally, and you try to strike this balance here right from the beginning, where people are ushered into a desire to feel happy or to try to balance out what you're describing, and in and you don't make a problem. You don't cite that as a problem per se.
I think that the pursuit of happiness is not in itself a problem. I think the problem is that the problem arises when we try to make the pursuit of happiness into something that is going to be permanent, that we're going to always be happy, that somehow we're going to create a life which is permanently happy. And it's the permanence that's the problem. This comes back to materialism and security. Mm-hmm. Security is the attempt to put a kind of safety net of permanence under everything that we do. Permanence does not exist. This gets into, and you know, of course, we go into this much more in depth later in the book. This gets into the Buddha's one of the Buddha's first teachings, which is that the human life and all life is conditioned by impermanence. Mm-hmm. So it's not so much that the desire for happiness is itself a delusion, but that it's not really the desire for happiness, it's the desire for my permanent happiness. And materialism is based on that. Materialism is based on the fantasy that my permanent happiness is possible. Start right there. My permanent happiness. So I think we have to deconstruct happiness, because the Buddha would say, yes, we are meant to be happy. Mm-hmm. We can be happy. Mm-hmm. But not without looking very, very deeply at why we're not and what is an authentic path toward that kind of happiness.
And enter right there where mindfulness or the modern or current day co-opting of certain types of meditation as a form of suggesting that it's possible to maintain safety, predictability, control, and rescue. I don't know.
Yes, okay, so that moves us right into the first level of why people meditate. And so I don't want to simply dismiss, like we talk about the fad of mindfulness, and it is a fad because the word fad is embedded in how materialism deals with everything. You know, if you get enough people to agree that this is the latest new thing, then it has a reality of its own. But the fact is that because we all want happiness, we're going to approach meditation with the same motivation. Right. And in the beginning, it's going to be a very self-centered and a very naive motivation. So the first level of motivation for people to meditate is, I'm living in a materialistic society. I'm doing my best to pursue my own happiness, my own security, that of my family, da-da-da-da-da-da. I experience stress sometimes. I experience disappointment. I experience that my program, there's glitches in my program for attaining this happiness. Maybe meditation can help me, take care of all those little glitches. Mm-hmm. So meditation then becomes my ally toward perfecting my personal pursuit of happiness. Yes. And that's the way in which mindfulness becomes part of the fad of a materialistic culture. You just have another advertisement for how you're going to keep your personal project of happiness going. You're going to do it by using mindfulness. So, and it doesn't do a lot of good to get up in arms, which I sometimes do about, hey, you people are totally corrupting the Buddhist teaching. How dare you? How dare you? The Buddha was much more profound than that. You can't just use mindfulness
Right,
for your own personal
you're
happiness.
You're going to become the Dharma police there.
Right. And I don't,
Yeah.
that's not a job that I
No,
want.
no.
That's not a job that I want.
No.
Because we have to always, the main thing about the Buddha was his compassion. That he saw everything that people did as a misguided attempt to be happy. Rather than that we were bad people or that materialism is this evil thing. Materialism is just a strategy for my personal happiness. And in the beginning, people will take meditation and use it to think that they can achieve that. Well, the answer is they can't. So it's not so much that it's a bad thing, but it's not going to work.
No, but it works just to, and maybe you can thread this right into the second motivation here that you point out, that there's I suppose this is complicated, but there's a disappointment that occurs here, and because the motivation can't see its way through to its intended result.
That's well said. Disappointment.
And
well said.
And in then therefore disappointing itself, you arrive at, well,
You arrive at the next.
you arrive at the next.
Next level of motivation. So I think that's really well said in a way that, particularly from this first level to the next, it's disappointment when you realize that this is not actually going to work. And so the next level of motivation is when your project to use meditation as a way of sort of fine-tuning your personal happiness, it becomes obvious over time that it's not working. And your disappointment about that, if you're willing to stay with meditation, all right, if you're willing to stay with it, your disappointment takes you to a greater level of a word that you like to use, of sophistication about what's really happening when I meditate. And so the next level of sophistication or reality, if you like, realism, is that we realize that our dreams aren't all going to come true. Meditation is not going to solve all of our problems. The notion mindfulness's results are not nearly as great as what they were, sold to us originally for. So why should I keep meditating?
Right, exactly.
And at that point, our disappointment becomes a kind of beginning of a kind of wisdom, in the sense that life is not just a bowl of cherries. There's lots of pits as well. And there's an element of disappointment, there's an element of suffering that comes into all human life. And as we get older, this becomes more and more obvious. It becomes more and more obvious that, we're not going to live forever, that our lives are short, that people's dreams don't always come true, that people are very, very disappointed, including ourselves, in many aspects of our lives. And that we're all going to face the absolute inevitability of death. And at that point, if we're still interested in meditation, we begin to see it in a different way. It begins to become an ally in dealing with the challenges and the suffering of life, rather than in fine-tuning our personal project for happiness. That's a huge shift.
That's a huge shift. Please, let's push into that, because that's exactly...
So I think the shift there, I think of this still as a more kind of a Western approach to how meditation could become authentic. It's kind of an existential approach. We see clearly the limitations of our human life, for us and everybody else. We see that death is inevitable. We see that we intuit the possibility that to meditate and to remain honest and open about our ongoing experience of pleasure and pain, hope and fear, disappointment and gratitude, whatever, we begin to see that meditation becomes an ally in our ability to face all of this without running away. And this is the first point at which meditation becomes an expression of bravery, because we have seen that life is suffering, just as the Buddha said. This is not to say that life is gloom and doom and that everything that happens is terrible,
No.
but that the sense of limitation about our mortality and the fact that all of our dreams don't come true, all of us are in that shared condition, without exception. And so, if we continue to meditate at that point, perhaps we see meditation as a way to live more honestly, more courageously, as a way to face our aging and our death with more dignity and more bravery. And so at that point, meditation becomes an ally to living an authentic life. But we haven't even gotten to Buddhism yet.
Yes, right.
That's the point I think I make in the chapter.
Yeah, yeah.
We haven't gotten to Buddhism. So we get to Buddhism.
You say, yeah, notice that hope and fear are still factors at this level.
Hope and fear are still factors in this level, in the sense that we're now using meditation to look at our hope realistically and let go of it when we have to, without deceiving ourselves, and to face our fears, including especially our fear of death.
Right.
So at this point, there's a warrior's attitude toward meditation, but we still haven't gotten to the sophistication of the Buddha's teaching about the suffering. And so the next phase is what is traditionally called the first turning of what the Buddha taught.
Right.
And that's facing the suffering, but facing it with a deeper understanding of where it comes from. So the phase before, we just realize there's suffering, and we think meditation will help me face it. Once we start practicing the Buddhist teaching, we start to learn to deconstruct where is the suffering coming from? How am I creating it?
Mm-hmm.
So meditation is not just about me using meditation as a way to deal with this suffering that I have no control over, but it's more, now meditation becomes a tool for me to look at the nature of the suffering and to see all the ways in which I'm creating it and to stop doing that. That's a much deeper understanding.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Freedom from the cause of suffering.
Freedom from the cause. That's right.
Freedom from the cause.
Not just freedom from the effect. You know, the level of using it as an ally to become braver is developing more courage about the effects. But
That's very powerful. The difference between freedom from the effect versus freedom from the cause. Yes. And the freedom from the cause is revolutionary.
And that's, once we begin to be inspired to meditate in order to attain freedom from the cause, we have entered the Buddhist path. Right. We actually haven't entered it until then. So those first two stages, which, as I said, very, very small percentage of human beings are ever kind of inspired to pursue.
Yeah, you say meditation becomes a revolutionary gesture with the aim to deconstruct the whole giant, futile edifice of hope and fear that keeps you trapped in the endless spin cycle of frustration and dissatisfaction.
Yeah, I wrote that?
You wrote that.
Yeah, I can't remember the guy. I don't remember the guy who wrote that.
It's good. And
yeah. So I guess I'm trying to say that in different words. Like, I think the way you put it was really beautiful. Is before we were just trying to get freedom or relief from the effects. Yeah. I like that better. Yeah. Relief from the effects. Yeah. Now we're trying to get freedom from the cause. And it's examining the cause that is the genius of the Buddha. Not just trying to put out the fires.
Yes.
But who lit the fucking match?
Yeah. And that that was the original design. I mean, meditation at this level of motivation is completely different, let's just say.
It's totally different because you're looking at not how do I keep managing the fire, but who lit the match? How did I light the match? And if I lit the match, how can I put it out? So it's a much more profound level of agency, of self-empowerment. It's like when you listen to the Buddhist teachings, you go, whoa, I created this whole thing, I and everybody else. And if I created it, I can deconstruct it. Mm-hmm. And so the level of empowerment that brings is very, very powerful. And it takes meditation to a whole new level of confidence. Confidence. Yeah.
Right. Because in looking at the cause of
Yes.
the edifice, at looking at how, I mean, you have examples of questions here that point to this, but
Yes, that's right. I remember I had a bunch of questions.
why are things the way they are? Why do I have this dissatisfaction despite all my hopes and efforts and good intentions? Is there anything to be done about it? I mean, that's a big one. There's a lot of anxiety, right? Anxiety ushers action. So you're going to do something out of anxiety.
Yes. Okay, that's a really good one too. It's appropriate that your anxiety would usher the action, but then you can't act out of panic. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's the difference.
No, that's it.
It's like you see, yeah, I have this underlying anxiety that no matter how I try to manipulate life, the dissatisfaction keeps returning.
No, in fact, trying to get rid of the anxiety and the level of anxiety we're talking about is, I mean, to inebriates into hope and fear again versus sobering into what we're talking about. You can't get rid of that. That's not the point.
No. But tell that to 99.
Oh,
Tell
yeah,
that to
that's-
99%
no,
of
right.
the inhabitants of our
No,
world.
no, no.
You know, I think there's a sentence in there. I remember I said something like Socrates said that the unexamined
Yeah,
life
life
is not worth living. There's a lot of people who would tell Socrates to mind his own business. You know, so you can't. This isn't like Jehovah's Witnesses, you know. Buddhists can't come. Buddhists can't come to the door, knock on the door, and say, "Do you want to be saved?" It's, just let me teach you how to identify with nowness. It's just not going to work on that level.
Wing bada bada.
It's not going to work. It's not going to work on that level at all. Okay, so we're in that whole thing about using meditation to look more deeply at the actual causes of suffering and how we are the cause of our own suffering, which is very empowering. And when we realize that, the confidence that comes from realizing that.
And just to
is
clarify the
powerful.
point, we are the cause of our own suffering because we're unconsciously identified
We're identifying with our stories.
with our stories.
Exactly.
And so, and this goes, you extend this here into sort of a motivation that pushes the cause even further, which is the benefit of others.
Exactly.
And this
And
enters into a territory that's, radical beyond beyond.
It is radical beyond the beyond. And this is the final stage. The way I describe it is that we come to the conclusion that our personal samsara, our personal path, is a drop in the bucket compared to the suffering everywhere. And so that the project of unraveling and healing our own suffering, based mostly, as the Buddha taught, ultimately on our ignorance of our true nature. It's too early to unpack what that means. But once we begin to see through our own ignorance, our eyes are like the scales fall away from our eyes, and we see the depth of suffering everywhere, not just ourselves, but everyone. And in a kind of leap of generosity, which is very, very human, I think, very, very human, we realize that just being involved in the project of taking care of our own suffering is a very limited vision of what the Buddha taught. And that we feel a sense of connection and empathy and responsibility for all beings. And at that point, our connection or our spiritual path is dedicated to helping all beings be free from suffering, which is a huge commitment. And it would be very unrealistic, wishful thinking, to say that even those of us who realize that that's the ultimate aim of meditation can sustain our commitment to that all the time. I think I say somewhere in the chapter that those who are able to maintain that commitment 24/7 throughout their whole lives to the benefit of others through the spiritual path are as rare as seeing a star after the sun has come up.
Yeah.
You know, rare as the Tibetan masters use that expression. Rare as a star in the daytime. However, and I think this is already happening in the West, many people realize that if they are going to commit to meditation as a genuine spiritual practice, that's where it's going. It's going beyond just doing it for ourselves. It's going to doing it for everyone. Great. There's a great quote I know you're familiar with, but a lot of folks who are listening to this may not have heard. It says, "Those who are asleep feel pain like the stroke of a hair across the palm of their hand. But those who are awake feel pain like the stroke of a hair across their eyeball." And this points not so much to the fact that as you progress along the path, that somehow you become more and more neurotic, but that as you progress along the path, your own suffering is just a drop in the ocean of the suffering that you see all around you in the world, all beings.
It also goes along with, again, the confidence and the strength. So it's not that we shouldn't maybe sort of, there's a point of clarifying here around.
Right.
It's not that you're over-identifying with other people's pain.
Well said.
That's
Right.
not, that's...
Right. In fact, that one of the cardinal rules of being a good therapist is that you can't over-identify with someone else's pain. So there has to, it's that empathy and that detachment at the same time that are essential
Right.
to being skillful in helping other people who are in pain. Right.
Right.
I mean, just speaking as kind of one therapist to
Yeah,
another,
right.
It's that kind of a balance, right?
Yeah.
I think that's part of what you're referring to.
That's exactly what I'm referring to. Okay. And that in this, it's the meditation for the benefit of others, so to speak. Is that, well, you end up being more helpful to the world if you're out of your own way.
That's very good. And at this level, and maybe I didn't say this in the chapter, but at this level, the way that you get out of your own way fully in terms of helping others through the spiritual path is through the realization of what we call emptiness.
Right.
Which we will tackle later. We'll tackle later. But, it's taught the Buddha had, the Buddhist teachings were two wings of a bird. Skillful means and compassion, and emptiness of the dreamlike quality of reality. Mm-hmm. And the only way that we can jump fully into complete compassion for all beings is to remember the dreamlike nature of all reality, which, remembering that is part of how we free ourselves from unnecessary suffering. Right. That's a whole other conversation.
But that's fine. I think this is, it's fantastic.
It's kind of bookmarking things for future conversations.
Yeah. And also we went from sort of just trying to be happy and manage to
working for the benefit of all beings every moment of your life.
Right? And the different levels of motivation and the depth of this. And yeah.
So, but the word motivation is important. Motivation means to be moved by, and we have to be motivated. Something has to motivate us.
Yes.
Human beings are always motivated by something. Otherwise, they're clinically depressed. Totally. So, but the question is, how much awareness is in the level of motivation that a person has?
Yes.
And I think that this chapter is an attempt to say, as human beings, we are naturally inclined to motivation. How do we move forward? What is our underlying worldview? But then the question becomes, how much intelligence, how much awareness is there behind our motivation? And the Buddha said the deepest, highest motivation of a human being is to work tirelessly for the alleviation of the suffering of other beings. Mm-hmm. And also the promotion of their happiness. Not at the expense of one's own happiness, but because one has discovered the source of happiness in such an authentic way that there's a generous impulse endlessly to share that with other people.
Yeah. There's a connection here between our previous talks and humility, generosity, these qualities that...
Yeah, humility, confidence, generosity. These are the qualities of a great warrior.